Turton. We are joined now by water expert Anthony Turton, who joins us now virtually just to give us an update. Mr. Turton, the minister seems to think he's not doing that badly in the 12 months that he's been in that office. What do you think?
Yes, good afternoon to you, the listeners. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the minister. Since he's come into office, he has certainly taken the bull by the horns. And of all of the, let's say, the last 3 or 4 ministers, he's undoubtedly the one that has shown the greatest sincerity and the greatest willingness to tackle the problem. The problems he's dealing with are absolutely overwhelming. The day zero crisis in Gqeberha is one problem. It's a very complicated problem. It's not just a question of rainfall. It's a question of institutional failure and inability to plan. And then, of course, you've got the whole situation in KZN with your sewage breakdown, etc. So these are extremely complex issues. And I think now's not the time to point fingers of blame at anybody. Now's the time for all South African citizens to come together to try and focus on solutions for these very vexing problems.
But Mr. Turton, although, of course, we are supposed to use water sparingly as a country, they've told us time and time again that we are a water-scarce country and rely on countries such as Lesotho, for instance, for our water. But when it comes to projects of infrastructure that have been left for years, some at some point since 2014, there's one that Manqoba actually mentioned. Since 2014, it was supposed to start working, and it's 2022, it still hasn't. That obviously is not necessarily an indictment on Senzo Mchunu individually, but those who have been in that office, in that department, to look after infrastructure for the water department all these years, seeing all these ministers come in and out. That's where the problem is, isn't it? Shouldn't there be, some clean-up when it comes to that?
Yes, if you want to trace it back to any particular moment in time, it goes back to Nomvula Mokonyane when she was minister, because she was Minister of Water and Sanitation, but she was also chairman of the of some ANC committee at the time of one of the national elections. And she gave an instruction to her staff at that point in time not to raise any of the issues about municipal sewage infrastructure. And that's really when the sewage infrastructure started falling apart. And that goes back to a constitutional problem that we have. We have a clause in our constitutional called the Cooperative Governance Clause. And Nomvula Mokonyane chose to interpret that clause as meaning that the National Department of Water and Sanitation was unable to intervene in the municipalities, which therefore implied that the Department of Water and Sanitation is unable to fulfill its regulatory role. So I'm a member of the SA Business Water Chamber, and we've been working very closely with ATA. And we've been pushing very hard now for the establishment of an independent water regulator. And this is now starting to come forward in the legislation and starting to come forward in the policy and strategy going forward, simply because you cannot be both player and referee. So this is something, it's a small little victory that we're having. And it's, the current minister, he's inherited all of these things. And he will, as far as I'm aware, he's simply going to continue implementing that independent water regulator. But he then has this major issue. There's over 1 trillion rands worth of broken infrastructure that has to be funded. And there's no way that the fiscus can do that. So therefore, we're looking at alternative funding models where private sector can get involved. But this is all for something that's happening in the future.
And of course, that's where South Africans start to become despondent, because you're talking about the enabler and the person who is enabled, right? The corrupter and the corruptee when you talk about public and private sector in some instances. But with day zero looming and the minister basically, saying that he does see that day zero is looming in the Eastern Cape, he does admit that it's a dire situation. When you look at things, and as a water expert, do you see South Africa having water cuts anytime soon, something similar to what Eskom is already doing with load shedding?
Yes, so I'm on the record as saying that the Eskom problem is quite small in comparison to the water problem. And it's very simple to explain why. In the case of Eskom, there's one entity that generates electricity. It's called Eskom. Fix it up and your problems go away. In the case of water, we've got multiple water boards. We've got multiple municipalities. Each of them have all got their own responsibility in the overall value chain. We are currently producing over 5 billion litres of sewage every day that goes back into our rivers. 4.3 billion litres of that is untreated or at best partly treated. So this is an absolute national catastrophe, way, way, way bigger than the Eskom crisis can ever be. And that is why, we can either choose to point fingers and get excited about this, or we can say, right, this is where we are. What are we going to do about it? Because if we don't do something very soon, then the crisis is not only a crisis of investor confidence, it's also a human health crisis. We've got a human health crisis that's looming. You can't put that amount of wastewater in your water that becomes drinking water and not expect there to be some or other human health implication. That is completely crazy to think like that.
And to think of the fact that in KZN there's communities such as Tongaat and Hambanati, for instance, who still don't have drinking water since April because of those floods. Of course, that was Mother Nature. We cannot necessarily blame government for the infrastructure damage that it caused, but sometimes that also added to the backlog that government already had. Is it normal for it to have taken this long to bring drinking water back to the communities of Tongaat?
The simple answer is no. The purpose of government, the reason we have government and the reason we pay taxes is to build resilience against shocks. So when you have a shock from a natural disaster, the purpose of government is to make sure that services are restored rapidly. But unfortunately, we've lost so much capacity in the country because of the policy of cadre deployment, where we've had people deployed into positions of authority for which they've got no technical skills. So this has completely hollowed out the institutional capacity of the state. So it's correct to say we don't have the human capacity, and we see it now in KZN, where I live in Port Shepstone area, and we also don't have water for weeks on end sometimes. And in fact, I'm part of a program right now drilling boreholes for lots of people, because that's the only way that we can get old age homes and frail care facilities onto viable water. So this water crisis is an absolutely major crisis, but it's one where there are solutions, and the South African engineering community has got a huge amount of capacity in it if it is involved or if it is incorporated. But it's been purposely excluded for various reasons, and now is the time to reopen that debate about the re-inclusion of that technical skill that we have in the country.
And just explain to me, just very quickly, Mr. Turton, the solution of boreholes is not necessarily a permanent one, right? Doesn't it put the earth table or something along the earth in danger to have more and more boreholes that are drilled?
Yes, I certainly don't believe that your boreholes are long-term viable solutions, and certainly not in a bulk water supply situation. There's all sorts of complexities there. But I'm involved in supporting some frail care facility, and these are people that are got poor health and they've got no water. So what do? This is a short-term solution, but you're correct. We have to put our heads together and come up with these long-term solutions. And I'm a person that believes very strongly in desalination as a long-term solution, and I've been pushing very hard for that, and I'm really glad to see that we're starting to get some traction now in the desalination space.
All right, Mr. Turton, thank you so much for your expertise and for speaking to us here on All Angles. That was water expert Anthony Turton. Let's take